This is a checkmate moment for Watchtower. When I say checkmate, there's certain things that Watchtower will always try to lie about, and a lot of it comes down to circumstantial evidence. But with what I'm going to show you in connection of my last video, this is a checkmate moment. There is nothing that they can say or do to justify this. And this is one of those situations where the only thing that witnesses can do is just ignore this and pretend it will go away. So when I say checkmate moment, in my last video titled Watchtower Degrades and Gaslights Women, I showed the inconsistency how women in a congregation are told that they can't have any assignments such as carrying a microphone, reading for the watchtower, running the sound booth, or attendance, or any assignments in the congregation except cleaning. But then suddenly when they need volunteers to do free labor construction 12-hour shifts, now suddenly women can have assignments and even positions in management when it comes to these construction sites. So there's only basically one excuse that Jehovah's Witnesses can give to justify this, and that one excuse is that women cannot have assignments in the congregation because one, they say it's theocratic, which I broke down in the last video how that doesn't hold up. And they'll try to say that when Apostle Paul said that women cannot teach in a congregation, that somehow that applies to carrying a microphone, which it doesn't. And I also covered that in the last video. The stubborn witnesses will just try to justify that it is somehow wrong for women to be used in a congregation and that only men can be used in a congregation, while ignoring the fact that when they want free construction, they then try to say, well, that doesn't count. So what I'm going to break down, and you can watch my last video to learn more about the subject, but what I'm going to break down shows that it is a checkmate moment for Watchtower, because I'm going to prove 100% that the organization acknowledges the fact that there's nothing wrong with women having assignments and privileges in a congregation. So you can find this information right on our website. You can search Organized to Do Jehovah's Will, and you can download it, and then you can go to page 55 and 56. So notice what I have highlighted on the left-hand side, just the first paragraph. So it says, one ministerial servant may be assigned to care for the literature so that we can obtain it for personal use and for the field ministry. Others are assigned to keep congregation accounts or territory records. Some are assigned to handle microphones, to operate sound equipment, to serve as attendants, and to help the elders in other ways. So that goes into everything I discussed last week as far as microphones, running the sound booth, serving as attendants, and other things such as reading for the Watchtower. So I have to explain a little bit about this because right away Watchtower is lying already. Because notice it's talking about ministerial servants, so it's making the claim that it is the job of ministerial servants to do microphones, serve as attendants, run the sound equipment, do the literature, and things like that. And then if you notice what I have highlighted at the bottom of the screen, it says, if there are not enough ministerial servants to care for some of these responsibilities, the body of elders may arrange for other exemplary baptized brothers to do this necessary work. So they're lying already. And I'm going to explain why I have to explain why they're lying, because it has to do with the point that I'm going to make in this video. Is what they're claiming is that it is only ministerial servants to do microphones and attendance and all that stuff. And you're saying that only if there isn't enough ministerial servants, then the elders can use other brothers to do those things. So The reason that I think they're lying about this, because clearly they're lying about this, but I think they're lying about this because I showed in my last video how that they try to justify not giving women these assignments because based on what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:13 and 1 Timothy 2:12, they're claiming the way they cherry pick those scriptures that the Apostle Paul said he does not permit women to teach, which explains why they can't serve as elders and ministerial servants because ministerial servants also teach on the platform. So I think the reason they're playing games and organized book by lying and saying that it only ministerial servants that do microphones and all that stuff is because they're trying to say that the reason women can't serve as ministerial servants and elders is because of what Paul said. So by lying and kind of saying that it's only ministerial servants that do microphones, maybe that's why they're lying about it. But before I even go on to more evidence, just to clarify this, and every Jehovah's Witness knows of this, that as soon as you get baptized, if you have good meeting attendance and if you comment at the meetings and if you're out in service, they will then promote you to so-called mic handler right away. It has nothing to do with being a ministerial servant. In fact, what they do is when they want to appoint a ministerial servant, they're going to base it on how well brothers did these other assignments. And everybody knows that's the way that it works. So they're flat out lying when they're trying to claim that those jobs are only for ministerial servants, and only if there's not enough servants can brothers do those things. That's a flat out lie. Now, just to make it clear that they're lying about that, if you go to the November 2024 study edition, Article 46, titled Brothers, Are You Reaching Out to Be a Ministerial Servant? Notice what's addressed in this paragraph, or not in this paragraph, but in this article. Now, I'm not even going to read paragraph 17, but if you notice the picture, right under the picture, it says, by giving baptized brothers assignments, elders can test them as fitness. And this is exactly what I just said, and everybody knows this. They give you these assignments and jobs such as holding microphones as soon as you get baptized, and as long as basically you're at the meetings and you're making comments at the meeting and all that stuff. So it is based on doing those things that you get appointed a service. So just to clarify, you can see in their own literature, they're contradicting themselves. They're always revising books. I remember when I first started studying, I was studying the Bible Teach book, and there's like 5 different versions of the same book because they keep revising things. And the reason I have to keep revising things all the time and deleting things is because of stuff like this. This organization lies so much that they contradict and get caught in their lies so much that they have to keep revising stuff. So as you can see in the organized book, they're trying to claim it is only ministerial servants that do microphones and handle the sound equipment and attendance. And at the same time, they're admitting that elders give regular brothers these assignments, and is based on these assignments that they test whether or not they can serve as ministerial servants. So this is just an example of how they lie so much, and this is why they have to keep revising all their literature and books and how they keep changing doctrine. So the reason I had to spend a little bit of time on this is because I want to make it clear that they use regular brothers to do these so-called privileges. And what I discussed in the last video is that they restrict sisters from these privileges for no reason, because you don't have to be a ministerial servant to do these privileges. You're not teaching in a congregation. And as you can see on the right-hand side, they let kids, 12-year-olds can do microphones and do the sound booth and things like that. So there's absolutely no reason that they don't let sisters do it besides the fact that they don't like sisters. But this is where it gets interesting. So this is going to be, when I said in the beginning of the video, a checkmate moment for Watchtower. So let me go back to what I have highlighted in green at the bottom. It says, If there are not enough ministerial servants to care for some of these responsibilities, the body of elders may arrange for other exemplary baptized brothers to do this necessary work. And again, as we just seen, that's a lie anyway. But then notice what's in pink. It says, if brothers are not available, an exemplary sister could be asked to assist with some things, even though she would not, of course, be appointed as a ministerial servant. So this may shock maybe certain sisters who didn't realize this was in the organized book, but I'm going to explain first why this stipulation is there, because there's a reason why this is there. So when it comes to the Bible School of Gilead and the School for Kingdom Evangelizers, what these schools usually do and train certain people do is to become missionaries, or what they call need graders. So sometimes what you have is there will be witnesses that go to these remote areas where there's no congregation, there's no Jehovah's Witnesses. And the idea is that if they can get enough Bible studies started and enough people want to get baptized, they can start and open a congregation. Now, I mentioned in the last video that for some reason, it seems that 65 to 70% of the Jehovah's Witness religion is made up of women. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know what's in their programming that it seems like women are more drawn to this religion, but clearly there's more women than men in this religion. So what happens a lot of times in these remote areas is that when congregations get started by maybe one missionary, you literally will have a congregation that may only have one or two men in a whole entire congregation. You could literally have 50 to 100 people in a congregation, and only three of them are men, and it is all sisters. So in this scenario, and I've known someone in Hong Kong. There was a sister in Hong Kong who I was connected with through social media. This was a long time ago, and she was in one of these congregations. And what she told me in her congregation was she said that there was about 100 publishers and only four men. And she said three are elders and one was just got baptized. So they didn't even have any ministerial servants. It was three elders and one other male that just got baptized. And basically like 97 women. So what she told me was that they actually had women running mics. And just to show you how absolutely ridiculous these people are, she told me that during a theocratic ministry school that women could also do the Bible reading, where they go up on stage and just read the Bible. And she said for the Bible reading, what they did was they made the sister sit at a table with another sister while she did the Bible reading. And that just goes into a point that I made last week about how they make sisters go up in twos to remind them that they're not as good as men. It takes two sisters to equal one brother. And that's just an example of that. But anyway, in Hong Kong, where the work is banned in Hong Kong, not completely banned, during this time, what she told me was that they could meet freely at the Kingdom Hall, but they weren't allowed to do any ministry. That they could get arrested if they were ever caught doing the ministry. So Hong Kong was not a very popular place for Jehovah's Witnesses, and therefore these congregations that were in Hong Kong, at least from what she was saying, for some reason were all women. So you literally only had four brothers and a bunch of sisters. So anyway, so that's a real thing. So the point that I'm making why I brought that up is that is why there's a stipulation in an organized book basically saying that if there isn't enough brothers, you can use sisters, right? But notice it did clearly say that although they would not be appointed as ministerial servants. So this is why that stipulation is there. But just to make it clear that in the United States of America, you will never see that happen. You will never go into a normal congregation and you'll never see a sister doing mics. In fact, every congregation that I've been a part of, elders will do mics when certain brothers are not there. So when there's like brothers who are scheduled to do mics and they don't show up for the meeting, you will see elders going back and forth with the microphone before they let a sister do it. So that stipulation in the organized book, it's only there because it applies to these very unique situations where if, for example, if you've got three brothers in a whole congregation, a brother can't read for the Watchtower and conduct the Watchtower and also have mic handlers and people running the sound booth in attendance. So any situations, they have no choice. They have no choice but to let sisters do these responsibilities because literally there isn't enough men to do all the responsibilities while the meeting is taking place. But again, you'll never see this in America or in a normal congregation. Now, going back to the reason that I'm bringing this up, and this is my checkmate moment, is that the only thing that witnesses can do to try to justify why they do not let women have these so-called privileges in the congregation and assignments is they'll try to say there's something wrong with it. But as you can see with the organized book, they're making it very clear that if there's not enough brothers, then sisters can do it. And it also made it clear that, but they would not be appointed as ministerial servants. So you see, there is no stipulation that says if there's not enough ministerial servants, they can appoint sisters as ministerial servants. Because according to the scripture they're using, they understand that they have a scriptural basis to twist to say why women can't serve as servants and elders based on what Paul said about teaching. But when it comes to these sisters doing these other responsibilities, there is stipulation they're saying because they know there's no scriptural basis. So what I'm saying is that they're admitting there's absolutely nothing wrong with letting sisters do microphones, work the literature counter, be attendants, right? Run the sound booth. There is no reason, there's no restriction, there's nothing wrong with it spiritually, there's no scriptural basis for that. And the point is, they're admitting that. So anyone that tries to say, oh, it's because it's theocratic, oh, it's wrong because Paul said women can't teach, they're admitting in their own organized book. There's nothing wrong with sisters doing this thing. They know there's nothing wrong with sisters doing these responsibilities, which is why they can say, well, if there's no brothers, then you can use sisters. But this is what I think sisters really need to understand about this, because they're making it very clear that they're only going to use you if they're desperate. There's nothing wrong with using sisters, but only if you're desperate. So when they flat out say, if brothers are not available, then sisters can be used. We're still not going to appoint them, right? Because that would be wrong. They can't be a servant because they would have to teach, right? So we're not going to appoint them, but they can still do all the work. So there's no other way to look at this. There's nothing wrong with sisters being used. They're clearly making men better than women, 100%. And if they're desperate, right? Because there's no brothers, only if they're desperate, they'll let her sister have some of these responsibilities, period. And sisters shouldn't be okay with that. Now, some may wonder what's the big deal about sisters having these responsibilities, right? What's the big deal? It's just work anyway. Well, the reason that it's a problem that they don't let sisters do these responsibilities is because notice what I have circled at the bottom of that page when it says ministerial servants render valuable service. You see, this organization, they brainwash people to think that running microphones, being an attendant, reading for the Watchtower, running the sound booth, and all those other assignments, that this is something that's a very valuable service to God, right? It is such a privilege to be able to work in Jehovah's house, right? Carrying a microphone for Jehovah is an honor. So they even make men feel like trash if they're not reaching out for these so-called little stupid assignments because they put this emphasis on it's such a big deal that it's such an honor to do these things. So when you push to the congregation how much it's an honor to do these assignments because you're working in Jehovah's house, it's only natural that if these things are such a privilege that women would want to do that too because it's an honor, right, to work for God. It's an honor to serve God's people. So if sisters are hardworking in a congregation and it's such an honor to do these things, then why are sisters being restricted from being able to do these assignments when it's such an honor? So what the organization is doing is they're taking this honor, this what they're claiming is a privilege, and are saying only men are good enough for this honor, for this privilege. Women are not good enough unless we're so desperate. If we're so desperate that there's only 3 men in a congregation and we're absolutely desperate and we have no choice, then we'll give women this honor, only if we're desperate. That's exactly what they're saying. So now let's look at the qualifications of a sister being used. So we go back to page 56 of the organized book. After it says how women can be used, but they won't be appointed ministerial servants, it says, an individual who is exemplary is someone whose conduct and worship are considered worthy of imitation. His or her meeting attendance. Now, notice how it says his or her. So they're talking again about sisters being qualified to be used doing microphones and attendance and all this stuff. So it says his or her meeting attendance, share in the ministry, family life, choices of entertainment, dress and grooming, and so forth are exemplary or are a good example for others. So again, according to their own information, all that a sister needs to be doing to qualify being used is she has to have good meeting attendance, share in the ministry, and women are the majority of people in the ministry. When I went out in service, most of the time it was all sisters out in service. So meeting attendance, service, now I don't know what it means when it says family life, but choices of entertainment, dress and grooming. I mean, women basically are always doing those things. So that's according to their own information, that's the only qualification. So if a sister is doing those things, if a sister is being obedient and she's working hard and she's setting a good example, then it's only natural she's going to want to have a privilege too for her hard work. But as you can see, they restrict women for no reason. They're not going to use women unless they're desperate. And that's exactly what the organized book is saying. Only if there's no brothers can a sister do these things. Now, I mentioned in my last video how I believe that 65 to 70% of this religion is made up of women. And that's just what my eyes see, right? When I've gone to conventions, when I've gone out in service, the number of women getting baptized versus the number of men getting baptized, the majority of this organization is women. And what the last video was about was the fact that while they restrict women in a congregation because they have a higher standard in a congregation, and they certainly don't want to use women in a congregation, that they make an exception when it comes to these construction projects. So suddenly now women can do all these assignments when they need help in construction. So what I brought out in that video is that because 65 to 70% of this religion is made up out of women, that is the only reason they allow women to be on these construction projects working, because if they restricted sisters from these assignments, then they would lose 65 to 70% of their free labor service. So it's only because they're desperate that they allow women to be used on these construction projects. And this is the exact same thing in the congregation level. Because as you look at the top of the screen, in these unique situations where you have these congregations that maybe only have 3 or 4 men in the whole entire congregation, and it's made up of all women, then if there's no brothers available, they can use sisters, right? So you can see it's only when they're desperate. That's all there is to it. It's only when they're desperate and they don't have a choice that sisters can suddenly, they can do mics, they can read for the Watchtower, they can work the literature counter, they can serve as attendants, they can do the sound booth, right? They understand there's no scriptural reason that they can't do those things. They're only going to allow sisters to do that stuff if they're desperate. And this is the same thing when it comes to the construction projects. It is the same thing. They're desperate. They don't have enough men to do all this construction work. It would cost them too much money to do all this construction work without hiring outside contractors. So, this is what I really want women in this organization to think about. Because based on my last video, again, this is a checkmate moment because they're putting it in their own words. They can use sisters. There's no scriptural basis. There's nothing wrong with it. They're admitting it. And Watchtower, see, sometimes they tell themselves, this is how much these people lie. That when people lie at this level, many times they contradict and they tell on themselves. So Watchtower would have been better off not having a stipulation. They shouldn't have a stipulation. They should just always hold to the same standard and say women can't be used because it's scriptural. And of course, the Jehovah's Witnesses are so brainwashed they're not going to question or challenge anything. But you see, when they do stuff like this, when they put in their literature and they admit, okay, well, if there's not enough brothers, then you could use sisters. Now it's a checkmate moment because no one can say that there's anything scripturally wrong with it. They're admitting there's no reason they can't use sisters. There's nothing scriptural about it. They're not breaking any Jehovah's standards. They're not teaching. They're making it very clear that they don't use sisters unless they're desperate. That is what they're saying to you. And when you really think about it, that is a huge disrespect. That someone is only going to deal with you if they're desperate. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. And then, so they're only going to use it in congregation if they're desperate, which in most congregations, they're not desperate, which is why they don't let sisters have these privileges that only men deserve these privileges that are supposed to be a privilege. But then when they want to post articles and talk about women in construction and ask women, can you volunteer to be a construction worker? Well, women in this organization, if you have self-respect and dignity on what this organization is doing to you, when they ask you to volunteer for construction work, there's no reason that you can't go up to your local body of elders and simply say, well, hey, you're asking me if I can take part in construction work. Well, why am I not allowed to run a microphone in a congregation? And if they say, it's wrong, or women can't, then you can say, well, the organized book simply says that a sister can be used. Right? So there's nothing scripturally wrong with it. Right now, of course, if a sister were to do that, they'd probably turn the tables and say, well, what apostate channel were you on? But this is something that any sister should be able to do. If they're asking you to volunteer for construction work, hard labor, 12-hour shifts, and all this manual labor with no pay, then there's no reason when they ask you to do that you shouldn't be able to say, well, why can I not have privileges in a congregation? So if this organization respected women, then they would allow women who want to do mics and work the sound booth to do those things if the sisters are so-called exemplary, right? If you respect someone, you don't have a mindset if you're only going to let them do something if you're desperate. So when it comes to these construction projects, women should really think about this and ask yourself and ask your local body builder and say, hey, I can run a bulldozer and work hard at a construction site for free. But then if I want to do something in a congregation, you're not going to use me unless you're desperate, right? You see, a loving God wouldn't treat you that way and only say, well, only if the congregation is desperate, we'll deal with you.